This is my week 6 video on exercise and CVD risk, and again I'm just going to talk my way through like I did the last one, and hopefully I'll cover everything. On physical activity and CVD risk, Schromm and Lee did a review of a number of epidemiological studies and compilated an article on this, and each of these studies used questionnaires as a way of discerning what people's physical activities were. So that made it really challenging to compare each of the studies against each other, because it was difficult to assess what study was determining how much physical activity for one group versus another group, etc. But overall, they did assess the leisure time physical activity. They also used CVD, which includes CHD and cardiovascular disease and CVD death. They established a baseline of relative risk, and overall they compared the moderate levels of all of them against each other and found a median risk reduction of about 30% for men and 40% for women. Of course, the greatest risk reduction being between low activity and moderate activity. More specifically, a women's health study followed 20,000 women over the course of 10 years, and for this study they used kilocalories burned per week as their way of identifying activity levels, and they found at least around 20% risk reduction for those that participated in moderate physical activity and slightly more for high and very high physical activity, of course with the greatest jump in risk reduction between low physical activity and high physical activity. The current 2008 guidelines say suggest 150 minutes per week. That comes out to about 20 minutes per day of moderate physical activity, or about 75 minutes per week. That's about 10 minutes per day, slightly more of very high intense physical activity. However, a more recent study by Lee in 2014 showed that even 5 to 10 minutes of low speed running, and they consider this 6 miles per hour, and if you think about it, the average person walks about 4 miles per hour, so that's not very quick running at all, and that can reduce your CVD risk by about 30% and your all-cause risk by about 60%. So moving on to defining and measuring fitness, your cardiorespiratory fitness, or CRF, is usually expressed in metabolic equivalents, or METs, or in maximum oxygen uptake, or VO2 max. Now, VO2 max can be acquired through physical activity that increases intensity, usually on a treadmill, and then they put on a mask that measures the oxygen intake, and that continues to rise until it plateaus, and at that point you've reached the maximum aerobic capacity, which is measured in O2 in milliliters per minute per a kilogram of body weight. Now, when you compare physical activity to CRF, physical activity is usually acquired through surveys and is susceptible to memories and also misclassification, whereas CRF is usually lab acquired, so it's more strongly associated with all-cause mortality. Your maximum heart rate is acquired through the formula of 220 minus your age. So for me, it's 220 minus 33, which gives you 187. Your target heart rate is usually calculated through your maximum heart rate minus the resting heart rate times 70% minus the resting heart rate. So for me, that's 187, my resting heart rate being 85, so minus 187 minus 85 times 0.7, all of that minus another 85, and that gives you about 156.4. 1 MET is the amount of energy consumed while sitting at rest, which is about 3.5 milliliters of oxygen per a kilogram of body weight. So for me, that's 3.5 times 61 kilograms, which is 217 milliliters of oxygen per a minute used. Poor MET for a 50-year-old man is about 28.5, and poor MET for a 50-year-old woman is about 21.5, though usually you can just take the male and minus 2 to get the the women's, it's not always that though. Factors that affect CRF can include things that you cannot control, like your age, your gender, genetics. Some things that you can control, things like your state of training or your mode of exercise. Other things like your altitude, the temperature outside, even your body composition, all have effects on CRF. Now, while specifically how genetics influence CRF is not completely known, studies have shown that the maximal heritability of CRF is 47%. And what this means is that changes in CRF is greater between families than within families.